I am in Antietam National Battlefield, just outside of Sharpsburg, Maryland. This is known as the single bloodiest day in American history. Now, the Battle of Antietam, that was fought one day, is one of the largest battles of the American Civil War, one of the most important, I should more so say. There is a lot of moving parts leading to this battle, and a lot within the battle itself, as well as the retreat. Now, I don't have time to explore every little detail of the battlefield today. In fact, even if I did, I wouldn't be able to do it in one day. You would need probably at least 2 or 3 days to really comb through all the movements out here. But what I feel is the microcosm of the Battle of Antietam is right behind me. This is a sunken road that connected the Hagerstown Pike, one of the major arteries into Sharpsburg, Maryland, and was a detour for farmers to get access to the Boonesboro Pike, which went east out of town. However, on September 17, 1862, this became a makeshift trench for Confederate soldiers as they held the Confederate center right here. And the resulting fighting that occurs in this region gives this area the new nickname of the Bloody Lane. And as we're going to learn, it's a perfect microcosm of what led to the Battle of Antietam, the chaos that occurred during the Battle of Antietam, and its aftermath. To understand why the Sunken Road became Bloody Lane, a quick recap of the Maryland campaign is in order. In the summer of 1862, one of the great turnarounds in military history was in play. Robert E. Lee had taken charge of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia and drove the Union Army to Potomac, commanded by George B. McClellan, down the York and James Rivers and away from the Confederate capital of Richmond. Then, Lee defeated the Union Army of Virginia in a second action near Manassas Junction. Lee was confident he could now bring the Civil War to northern soil. However, his movements into Maryland did not have the intended effect he expected. He was forced to divide his army to capture multiple objectives. When McClellan realized how spread out the Confederates were, he pinned Lee to defenses along Antietam Creek near the farming village of Sharpsburg, Maryland. In theory, Lee was trapped and on the verge of having his army obliterated. However, McClellan was known to overestimate his enemy. He spent 2 full days formulating what he felt was the best strategy to annihilate the Army of Northern Virginia, but his delay allowed Lee to consolidate his strength. Ultimately, McClellan's plan for September 17, 1862 was a strong right punch upon the Confederate left, situated on a plateau north of Sharpsburg. Meanwhile, the strong Union left hook would push toward the Confederate escape route across the Potomac. The Union center was to demonstrate northeast of Sharpsburg to deter Lee from sending soldiers from the flanks. That plan did not pan out. The Union right punch was to consist of nearly 30,000 soldiers from 3 different Union corps. In the bloody fighting denoted by famed landmarks such as the Cornfield and Dunker Church, 2 Union corps commanders were wounded, the latter mortally. The Confederates of Thomas Stonewall Jackson's corps stubbornly held their positions. Part of why this first phase of what became known as the Battle of Antietam was stalemated is because of miscommunication, particularly among the Union's Second Corps. Imagine trying to get nearly 10,000 men in the lines necessary to assault while your target was blocked by rolling hills, fences, crops, and the smoke of battle. This chaotic environment may explain as to why only one of the Second Corps' 3 divisions managed to follow the planned route. The division commanded by General William French could not locate the lead division of General John Sedgwick. Instead of marching west, French swung south. The Union division of General Israel Richardson followed suit. This unintended change of course set the stage for an unplanned second phase to the Battle of Antietam. So what ends up happening is 2 Confederate brigades are going to be shifted here to the Sunken Road, sensing that the battle may start swinging to the Confederate center. Now, Robert E. Lee only had 38,000 Confederate troops at most on September 17th, and that full number would not be here at the start of the day. So he is essentially running troops back and forth of his interior line to hold various positions, key positions being under attack. The brigades that were sent down here are of Robert Rhodes and G.B. Anderson. They're going to make their way down here. We're actually walking right along Rhodes' line right now. And when the men discover is the depression in this farm lane makes for a makeshift trench. And what they're going to do is they're going to start taking the post and rail fence from here and stacking them up on the north side of the road. giving them as much protection as they can, and they wait to see what the Union line is going to do. You'll notice here that we are very close to that hillside, and you wouldn't be able to see the Union forces moving until they crest that ridge. They're in pretty darn close range, the Union are. Conversely though, the Confederates have the advantage, at least in this position, for Robert Rhodes's men, because the Union ain't gonna know what's gonna hit them until they hit the top of the hill. Some describe the Confederate fire, the opening volleys, as a buzzsaw hitting the Union lines. Now, in the fields behind me is where the 1st Delaware, part of French's attack on the Sunken Road, would have made. Now, you can't see it because of the cornfield, but this is not even terrain, and this is not a sunken road looking on high ground. It is very uneven. Sometimes there's elevation above the road, other times the road is looking over the elevation. In this case, the 1st Delaware never had been in battle before. Their only exposure to gunfire was watching the Battle of Hampton Roads. They watched from the shore that famous ironclad battle between the Monitor and the Merrimack. So these guys really don't know what it's like to be in the battle, and you read reports going into the Antietam campaign that these guys are packing their haversacks with enthusiasm. They're excited, like, we're finally going to prove it. We've been in the Army for almost a whole year now. We're finally going to prove it, boys. Well, they're going to get to prove it, as when they ascend over this rise, they have no idea what's awaiting them. Elements of the Confederate line here in the Sunken Road. And we are approaching the monument to the 1st Delaware Volunteers, commanded by Colonel John W. Andrews of the 3rd Brigade, 3rd Division, 2nd Corps. On the morning of September 17, 1862, this regiment crossed Antietam Creek, forming right of first line of French's division, advanced with heavy skirmishing through Roulette Farm, and became fiercely engaged immediately in front of Sunken Road. Withdrew to stronger position 100 yards north of here. 8 of the 10 company commanders and entire color guard killed or wounded, and their losses are listed below. In just 5 minutes, 200 men of the 1st Delaware had already fallen to the ground. Eventually, the entire color guard protecting the regiment's flags were amongst the bodies strewn in front of the lane. Though it may seem ridiculous today, flags were an essential component to the integrity of Army units. So long as the flag flew, soldiers could still have faith they would make it through the day and gain victory. Lieutenant Charles R. Tanner later recorded, "To lose what we had sworn to defend with our blood would have been, in our minds, a disgrace, and every man of the 1st Delaware was ready to perish, rather than allow the colors to fall into the hands of the enemy." Tanner and about 100 Delawareans charged the Sunken Road to retrieve the colors. Many fell, Tanner himself wounded, but the colors were successfully carried back to the Union line. Tanner would later be cited the Medal of Honor for this action. Amongst the Green troops in French's division were the 130th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry. They were commanded by Colonel Henry Zinn, who is there on the, he has his face there on the monument. He was a school teacher from Allen, Pennsylvania. Now, amongst the men in the 130th PA was Private Edward Spangler. Edward Spangler was just 16 years old when he was here at Antietam. And you can imagine this young boy, it's his first time going into battle. He comes over that rise. He sees all these Confederate troops down here, well protected. Must have been a shocking sight. And probably when the first volley fired, he was surprised to find he was still standing. Now, the 130th PA went into the battle with 40 cartridges in their cartridge box and another 40 that they had stowed away in breast pockets within their coats. Within minutes, they had expended, at least Spangler reports, he had expended all those rounds. And Spangler is going to go over to the 1st Delaware's casualties. He's going to start picking around the ground, trying to find anything. Now, the 1st Delaware and the 130th PA did not have the same muskets. They came in with different muskets. And Spangler's a little worried, like, oh, please, please work, please adapt. Thankfully, the rounds from the 1st Delaware did work with his musket, and he got off about another dozen shots. In total, Spangler reports he fired 88 rounds into the Sunken Road before he was able to evacuate. Unfavorable terrain and inexperience prevented the soldiers of French's division from breaking through, but not before paying a terrible price in blood. Realizing the obstacle the Sunken Road was becoming, General Richardson could be more calculated in his approach, continuing to attack south, but also hoping to outflank the lane from the east. The 1st Brigade he sent toward the Confederate line would become one of the most famous units of the American Civil War, the Irish Brigade. The storied unit was the brainchild of General Thomas Francis Meagher. To some, he was a hero, to others, a villain. Defiant advocate for Irish independence, he was deported by British authorities to Tasmania for his actions in stoking a failed uprising. Key figures in New York succeeded in extraditing Meagher to the United States. Though his fiery lectures made him popular with New York's elite, Meagher struggled to gain sincere support for freeing Ireland. Meagher shifted tactics from fighting a direct war of Irish independence to using the Civil War to build Irish unity in northern states by leading Irish soldiers in battle against the Confederacy. That ambition had morphed into a brigade of 4 regiments, and with Meagher on horseback leading an assault on the Sunken Road. Before they were in view of the lane, the Irish Brigade already suffered terribly as Confederate soldiers moved upon high ground in front of the lane. When the Green Regimentals crested the hillside, they endured the same withering fire as French had. Meagher's plan was to make the regiments get off 2 to 6 volleys before fixing bayonets and storming the Sunken Road. It became quickly apparent that was unrealistic until reinforcements could be brought up. The Irish Brigade would pay dearly for holding in place, suffering 540 casualties. Their efforts were not completely in vain. The 1842 Springfield, the smooth-bore musket the Irish Brigade was equipped with, was often considered to be outdated, save for one feature. At close range, the load of buck and ball had a wide path of destruction for anyone immediately in front of the muzzle.
So I am standing, I think, at what may be one of, if not the highest points in the sunken lane, maybe with the exception of the observation tower. No, I'm not talking about the top of the tower. I know that wasn't there in 1862. And down there, you had a good about 5 feet depression, but as you start getting up here, you'll notice the lane greatly starts flattening out. And you still have a good bit of protection here, but just as a friendly reminder, this is not a perfect earthwork. And what initially was a ready-made fortification by farmers for Confederates quickly would turn into a death trap for some of these soldiers. This is the mortuary cannon from George Anderson, General George Anderson, the Confederate Army. Now, the Antietam National Battlefield has 6 of these mortuary cannons, and they denote the approximate location of where a general was either killed or mortally wounded. So you can guess what ended up happening with Anderson. But before we get to his demise, let's explain where he starts in the war.
George Anderson began the war as the colonel of the 4th North Carolina, organized in 1861 with men from the central and eastern portions of that state. Their first assignment in the war was to guard the Manassas Rail Junction, which rests between the rival capitals. In spring of 1862, Anderson led the regiment in the defense of Williamsburg, Virginia, for which he received the promotion to brigadier general. From there, Anderson took charge of the whole brigade and kept a watchful eye over the regiment he had organized at the start of hostilities, now nicknamed the Bloody Fourth.
The commander of the 4th North Carolina at the time of Antietam was Augustus Edward Osborne, or he was known just simply as Gus. Interesting note, Gus's father was actually a soldier for the American Army during the Battle of New Orleans during the War of 1812. And he'd come from the Alabama frontier. Yes, Alabama was a frontier at one point. So he is here commanding the 4th North Carolina Regiment, once George B. Anderson's regiment, who is now the brigade commander. So that's who Osborne is answering to. And this regiment was very small when it came into Antietam. Something you'll notice about the Antietam campaign is how small the Confederate regiments are to the Union regiment. They only had, I want to say it was 100, but let's say 300 to be generous to the 4th North Carolina. They had a very small contingent here, and as such, it's caused some problems for wasn't just the 4th North Carolina, I'm just highlighting them, but a lot of these regiments were very small in size for the Confederates, so they couldn't fill this lane wholly. So there were gaps in the line here, and eventually the Union is going to start exploiting that. So French's attack occurred up there. French's attack occurred behind us here against Roget's brigade. As the afternoon shifts, when Israel Richardson Union brigade is going to come over the rise, or Union Division, I should say, comes over with his brigades. They're going to start attacking on this side, where the 4th North Carolina is with Anderson's group. And as the fighting becomes intense, they're going to eventually, at the midday, or start taking crossfire from that hill over there from Caldwell's Union Brigade. You're also going to have the Irish Brigade firing down this way. This is a death zone to be in. You do not want to be on this end of the bloody lane. And eventually, Anderson, the General Anderson, will actually take one of those bullets and will ultimately die from those wounds a few weeks later. Now, we are near the bend in the Sunken Road, and it was approximately in this position that the 6th Alabama were positioned. And when it comes to telling the story of the Bloody Lane, arguably the most linguistic orator of this engagement would be then Colonel John B. Gordon. Now, we've talked about Gordon before in the channel. He leaves a very fantastical account of him coming across General Francis Barlow many years after the American Civil War, after he felt he was killed. So Gordon's always an interesting read, but he probably had his most harrowing experience right here in this region. He's in charge of the 6th Alabama, and apparently Robert E. Lee rides up as Rhodes is deploying the brigade here in the Sunken Road. And Gordon will turn to Lee and say, these men are going to stay here till the sun goes down or the day has been won. Gordon is determined to hold this lane at all costs. And well, through the course of his defense, he will suffer 5 wounds during the engagement. The 5th one actually went into his cheek, and if you're following Gordon's words, he falls into his forge cap in front of him. Somehow a bullet had grazed through it earlier in the battle and let the blood flow out, preventing him from drowning in his own blood. Now, as I mentioned, we've talked about Gordon on the channel before, so miraculously, he was able to recover from his wounds and would be promoted. Eventually, he was a high-ranking general in the Confederate Army before the war is over. This is the mortuary cannon for Israel Richardson, and you know where this is going to end, but let's tell you where it starts. Richardson is command of a division in the Union 2nd Corps, and as we've been talking, the plan of the attack for the Union 2nd Corps was they were supposed to go across and attack and support the 1st and 12th Corps attacking the Dunker Church. Well, only one of those 3 divisions, Sedgwick's division, actually went through with that plan. French got lost, curved down, and ended up getting into contact with the Confederates led by Robert Rhodes over there in the bend in the Sunken Road. Richardson, realizing what's going on, is going to support French. He's going to come down a little farther, and he's going to face off with G.B. Anderson's Confederate Brigade. Now, Richardson is going to be several yards, a little bit out over the hill. You might be able to see those trees over there. He'll be actually, as the battle progresses and he starts sensing that the Confederates might be breaking, they might really be running. When he sees what's happening to the Irish Brigade up here, he's like, we got to send reinforcements to the Irish Brigade. Well, a brigade commanded by General Caldwell were just over this hillside, kind of hunched down behind some haystacks. They were providing supporting fire, but they really weren't participating with the battle yet, for various reasons. Some say that Caldwell was... Something's going on over there. Yeah. It's happening. I don't know what's happening. It's not my car. It's not my car. All right. Anyways, Caldwell has his brigade down here, and there's various reasons that have been debated why Caldwell's not involved in the battle yet. Eventually, Richardson gets fed up, rides out to see where Caldwell is, and is told he's standing behind a haystack observing. To which Richardson will shout, "God damn the field officers." He is going to override Caldwell's command and tells the brigade to wheel about and come onto this hillside and support the belligerent Irish Brigade. There will be another brigade that at this time, I must be honest, I cannot recall. The 2 more Union brigades are coming in to support the Irish Brigade, and that is what's going to begin the domino effect in the Sunken Road. Now, the Confederate line breaks, it snaps. They start breaking through Piper's Farm over there. Richardson is off his horse. He is encouraging his men, go, we have broken, we got the Confederates on the run, chase them to the Potomac River, and then a piece of artillery shrapnel is going to hit him. Now, people did not think this wound would be serious. He felt it may take a long recovery, but he should recover. He was taken to the Pry House, McClellan's headquarters. Unfortunately, in October of 1862, Richardson succumbed to his injuries, a combination of the injury itself and infection. And a little bit of a tragic twist to it, it was said that Lincoln, should Richardson make a full recovery, was going to make him the next commander of the Army of the Potomac.
Running low on ammunition, caught in a crossfire, and no reinforcements coming, Confederate soldiers were longing to hear a command to withdraw from what was now becoming Bloody Lane. When Colonel Gordon was taken out of action, his replacement tried to reorientate the 6th Alabama in a better position. But the young replacement's inexperience showed when he unknowingly gave the command, "About face forward march," the signal for a retreat. One by one, the tattered Confederate regiments hurried from the Bloody Lane and through the apple orchard of Henry Piper, site of General James Longstreet and D.H. Hill's headquarters during the battle. Curiously, although Piper claimed to possess 6 slaves in the summer of 1862, his loyalties remained with the Union. It was here that efforts were attempted to reform shattered units streaming from the lane. Even Longstreet, second in command of the entire army, threw himself into the maelstrom. He ordered his staff officers to dismount and man a cannon they had no prior training in using. With Israel Richardson wounded, there was no one on the Union side of the Bloody Lane to exploit this breakthrough. As this phase of battle was not part of McClellan's plans, the commanding general shifted focus to strengthening the attacks across Antietam Creek on the Confederate right flank. Ultimately, the remains of the Union's 2nd Corps would occupy the Bloody Lane for that evening and into the next day, while the ruins of D.H. Hill's Confederate division reformed around Piper's farm. Although greatly battered, Lee would succeed in evacuating the Confederates across the Potomac River the night of September 18th, officially bringing an end to his first invasion of the North. The Army of the Potomac found themselves holding a battlefield for one of the first times in the war. Though the soldiers may not have felt victorious, President Lincoln did. The actions at Antietam were enough to validate the Emancipation Proclamation. Originally a war measure that freed slaves in rebel territory, it would be a precursor to the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which formally abolished slavery across the United States in 1865. While this has been the story often told to make the bloodletting at Antietam seem warranted, I've always wondered if more could have been achieved that day. Yes, McClellan did succeed in driving Lee out of Maryland, but in all 3 phases of battle, the Union repeatedly came close to victory, only to be driven back at the last minute. Nowhere is that more prominent than the fighting around the Bloody Lane. What would have happened if reinforcements were sent to capitalize on the breakthrough Richardson had achieved? Would the war have ended on September 17, 1862? Of course, we will never know. What we do know is the fighting around the Bloody Lane produced some of the ghastliest sights of the war.
Bloody Lane's made famous by some photographs Alexander Gardner took just a few days after the battle was fought here. Antietam is the site of the first battlefield dead photographs in, as far as I'm aware, in world history, at least in American history.
Maybe it's because of Gardner's photographs that the Bloody Lane and the 5,000 Americans made casualties there have haunted me more than most actions I've thus studied about during the American Civil War. It's the epitome of futility that war can often deliver to people.
And I think ending our retracing of the Bloody Lane, a perfect way to end it is here in front of the Irish Brigade monument. So I'd like to thank you for watching. Yes, we've been splicing between on-location filming and editing behind the scenes. The gnats are killing us. The gnats are the real defenders of the Sunken Road, and I have lost that battle with them. But in the intermediate time, thank you again for watching. If you liked the video, hit the like button down below. If you want to go the extra mile supporting me, subscribe to the channel, or you can donate a cup of coffee to me from my Ko-fi link in the description below. That's it here from the Sunken Road at Antietam. We'll see you next time.